Nega dagondi Dahti Tsetso j'ai Sidley Quek on Tsante Sinye Naheainda got Dehcho First Nations Goa Galinda. Hello everyone, my name is Dahti Tsetso. I work for Dehcho First Nations and I live in Fort Simpson. I was really honored to have played a role in helping to finalize Edéhzhíe as part of a working group effort. This is an image that was created to celebrate the signing of Edéhzhíe as a Dehcho protected area. And before I get too much further into the presentations, I just wanted to make some acknowledgements. In the room we have former Grand Chief Herb Norwegian, and Herb, if you want to wave at everybody. Herb played a huge role in his tenure as Grand Chief, helping to lead and guide Edéhzhíe as it moved forward through the years. There was a number of key players within the region, the leadership through the years from all four of the Edéhzhíe communities. Elder Jonas Antoine, who played a role right from the beginning and maintains his role to this day with our board. And we also have our ECCC partners sitting in the back. So if you guys want to wave, Lindsay Armour and Vicki Johnson. So it's just an acknowledgement that this work, similar to what was shared in the previous presentation, this sort of work happens because a lot of people agree and commit their time and their efforts to it. So the area that you see on the map is known as Edéhzhíe. It's an area that's important to four communities in the Dehcho, Fort Providence or Dehcho, Jean Marie or Edéhzhíe, Fort Simpson or Sidley, and then also Wrigley or Pitsiki. There's also acknowledgement that this area in the northeastern section of it is also important to the Dehcho. So we had their support moving forward as these discussions progressed. Similarly to Tlitsok, the protected area initially was much larger when it was in its candidate protected area stage, with multiple levels of government being involved in negotiating this agreement. The compromise was the boundary that we see on the map today. The elders of our region, though, were still very happy and satisfied because their goal was to protect that Horn Plateau that you can see kind of in the center of the protected area. So bear with me, the next few slides are very text-laden. I tried to rely on the establishment agreement when I was trying to pull forward the information for this presentation. The vision for the area, is kind of laid out in the preamble of the establishment agreement, but essentially over 20 years of work has accumulated to try and create an area that is Indigenous-led, that's based on a government-to-government relationship, and that implements the highest level of protection for Edéhzhíe. That was very important to our communities and elders and leaders as the Edéhzhíe discussions progressed and continue to progress, that protection of this area is of the utmost importance. And the goal has always been to maintain this area for present and future generations. Edéhzhíe is recognized by the region as being spiritually and culturally significant. And ECCC came to the table. They share goals that our region had about protecting biodiversity. This area is very important for wildlife, for fish, for waters. The preamble is not as poetic as when you hear the elders talk about this area. I was most recently sitting through an oral histories report on the area, and they talk about the Horn Plateau as being its own source water, that all the water drains out of the region, out of that area, and so it's really important for protection. And there's a lot of oral history about Edéhzhíe being considered a breadbasket of the Dehcho because of its wealth and resources for wildlife and fish and habitat. So this is not nearly as poetic as when you hear the elders talk. So where are we at with establishment? In 2018, the Dehcho Annual Assembly passed an assembly resolution, and in our region, assembly resolutions are sort of the highest level of decision making amongst our leadership. So they passed a resolution that enabled the Grand Chief to sign the Edéhzhíe Establishment Agreement and finalize that work. But simultaneously, that same resolution also passed a Dehcho Protected Area Law. And this morning, Danica talked about their work at the Indigenous Circle of Experts and the hard work that they put into promoting Indigenous protected areas and bringing that understanding to at the federal level, at the national level within Canada. So I feel like this is a little bit of a full circle moment because we were able to build off of their proposals and to come to our leadership and to our assembly and say, the Dehcho Dene have been in this area since time immemorial. We've always followed our Dene laws. And now nationally, governments are starting to recognize that through something they're calling an Indigenous protected area. So the Assembly passed a resolution that also enacted a Dehcho Dene protected area law and recognizes Edéhzhíe as being designated under it. So Edéhzhíe is unique in that it's going to become a national wildlife area under the Canada Wildlife Act. But it's also recognized formally by our Assembly and in a way that government understands as being a Dehcho Dene protected area under Dene law. So since signing Dehcho First Nations and ECCC, we've been working very busily towards implementation. So since 2018, things have started to try and roll quickly. I very probably unhelpfully just left as soon as we signed and went away and had a baby, and I literally just came back a couple months ago. So it's been really fun for me to come back in at this juncture and to see all the hard work that people have been moving towards with Edéhzhíe. So since signing, there's been an Edéhzhíe Management Board. That's where that government-to-government relationship lies under the agreement. Those members have been appointed. There's members from all of the 4 communities, from our government partner from the region, and an independent chair. Edéhzhíe staff have been hired. We have community-based staff. We have regional staff. We're slated to hire Edéhzhíe guardians under the agreement. The board is going to be responsible for developing the plan that will guide the actions of the protected area. They have 5 years to do that, so it's not created yet. During the interim, actions will be guided by interim planning. So there's been a lot going on since signing. We were asked to kind of highlight how these areas are unique. And so I wanted to just re-highlight that Edéhzhíe gives that dual designation for protection. It recognizes Dene law. It also uses federal legislation to give protection to this area. Edéhzhíe is a concept that's talked about a lot in our region. Translated, it roughly means I am a Dene. Under the agreement, there's a definition that tries to capture, and you can see it in the italicized brackets, capture the sentiments that are meant when somebody says Edéhzhíe, or when elders use it in meetings. And so the agreement actually recognizes this as being important and gives it value within the agreement and in our decision-making processes. The agreement also gives value and consideration to Dehcho Dehzhíe. In the Dehcho region, the elders and leaders there have really put language strengthening at the forefront of conversations, and they've linked it to the work we do with land. There's a recognition that being Dene and language are intrinsically interconnected, and so in order to take care of land properly, we also need to take care of our language and culture. And so the Edéhzhíe Agreement attempts to give value to those concepts. And finally, the agreement also recognizes and gives DFN the responsibility to implement the Dehcho Indian Stewardship Guardians Program in Edéhzhíe. And this afternoon we'll explain what that program is about a little bit further. But essentially, it's a program that the region has been collaborating to build, and it's based on the concept of Edéhzhíe, and it also incorporates guardians, local people being out on the land as eyes and ears. I think this is the last text slide, so bear with me. The other thing the agreement does that's a bit unique is senior representatives from both parties are compelled to the board meetings. That was done intentionally to ensure that decision-making within the organizations that are responsible for implementing the board direction are there in the room when they're contemplating it. Elder and harvester committees are also supported by the agreement. When we were consulting our communities about what Edéhzhíe should look like in the future, when we'd go into community, we'd have elders and harvesters come to the meetings, and they wanted to share their knowledge, and they wanted to share their thoughts and how things should be approached. And what we were starting to recognize was that the agreement didn't give a process for them to share their knowledge. And so we built in these committees to be supported in each of the 4 communities as a mechanism to try and work with elders and harvesters to gather the knowledge that they would like to share so that it could filter up into the management plan. It also mandates the development of an enforcement and harvesters protocol. So because we'll have our own guardians as eyes and ears of the land, and ECCC also has enforcement officers, an enforcement protocol is going to be developed to try and formalize a relationship between those enforcement officers and our guardians. So that way they have an understanding of how they relate to one another and have that laid out so it's clear for everybody. And the harvesters protocol is a recognition that Dehcho Dene have their own laws and ways of understanding how to respectfully harvest. And so there's a commitment there to also formalize that. A lot of times these laws and these understandings are oral based, and so under the agreement we're going to try and formalize it in writing. Lessons learned so far. I've only been back since January, but what I'm recognizing very strongly is that while negotiating this agreement took a long time, it's been over 20 years, and there was many challenges in that journey. Implementation is a whole new kettle of fish, and so implementation is bringing a whole new set of challenges, and so hopefully we'll be able to meet all of them head on. And so I just wanted to share some images. This is the sort of thing when we're talking about Edéhzhíe or Dene knowledge. These are the sorts of activities that we see being important to managing Edéhzhíe in the future. Elders and youth on the land, practicing Dene culture, guardians mentoring the next generation on the work that they're doing. This is actually a picture up on the Horn Plateau at Willow Lake, but this is what it's all about. So, guardians, elders, youth on the land. So, merci.
Great. Thank you, Dahti. We have time for one quick question for Dahti. Oh, Danica. Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm really interested in the preambular paragraph that talks about the highest standards of permanent protection, and then when you went into sort of how there's now a Dehcho protected area law, I'm sort of interested, like, how do you implement that in the context of sort of different kinds of protections that are out there? So you want the highest level, like, is that a combination of different types of protections all at the same time? And if so, how do you sort of navigate your way through protections that may not correlate very well in terms of the way they interact? So, so you have like your indigenous legal regime or indigenous legal order sort of trying to work with, you know, laws or other permanent protections that may not communicate very well with those indigenous laws. So how do you plan on like looking at that kind of implementation? Like, how do you implement the highest level of permanent protection?
You hit on like one of the biggest challenges I think we have when it comes to implementing Edéhzhíe. So it's interesting that you honed in on that. So our region and our leadership and elders have always been very, very clear that for them, permanent protection means protecting it from resource development. So for them, that, and in Western terms, that means surface and subsurface withdrawal, permanent, indeterminate withdrawal. So under the agreement, there's different governments who have different responsibilities to achieve that. And so as we move forward, before we can establish Edéhzhíe as a national wildlife area, those withdrawals need to be in place. And so there was an interesting sort of mechanism that the agreement implemented, which was recognizing the complication of all those government-to-government relationships around protection and different government interests and the complication of that conversation, and knowing that all this work is now completed. The agreement did something unique, and it created an effective date for the agreement, and then it also created an establishment date. So there's a distinction under the agreement for that. So once that agreement was signed, it became effective, and all the commitments that our region and our federal partner made through the agreement were then in effect ever since signing. Establishment had a separate date under the agreement, and that's when our federal partners can then list Edéhzhíe under their legislation. And in order for that to be completed, there needed to be those permanent surface and subsurface withdrawals in place. And so there's a bit of like a fine dance happening, and it's still underway. And it was done that way so that way we could move forward without neglecting our principles and without neglecting our values. That being said, I think moving forward into the future, I definitely don't have all the insights, and I don't think anybody does at this point all the answers on how protection gets implemented in terms of Dene law, federal law, territorial withdrawals. I think that's something that will be continually revisited by everybody and figured out as everybody moves forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dahti. We'll have to move on to the next presentation. Give Dahti a hand.